Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Friday, February 4th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 211 days, the game against Michigan in 296 days. That week one matchup with Notre Dame is slowly inching just a little bit closer with each passing day. That's how time works. That is not not only the nation's marquee matchup in week one this year, it is also very likely going to be the biggest week one game that Ohio State has played in terms of rankings in most fans' lifetimes. Buckeye Scoop's Kevin Noon wrote about that recently at the site. He joins me this morning. Kevin, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
So it seems like over the years, Ohio State has scheduled a lot more easy openers than difficult ones, and sometimes that's the Big Ten scheduling it, and sometimes it's Ohio State. But it seems like it's probably, when it's up to Ohio State, that's probably by design, because you got the old adage about improving the most between week one and week two, so theoretically you're better off waiting to play a better non-conference opponent. But they're not doing that this year. If the way too early top 25 rankings are correct, and when are they not, this could be the biggest, highest ranked season opening matchup for the Buckeyes in literally decades. You went back and looked at the last 40 years, incredibly. It has actually been almost 20 years since Ohio State opened the season with any ranked opponent. So have to go all the way back to 2003 and the Washington game in 2003. First of all, I couldn't believe that was the most recent ranked opponent for Ohio State to open the season. But do you remember that game that was coming off that national championship season?
Right, I do remember it somewhat. That was one of the few years I was not living in Central Ohio. I was living in Texas at that point, but 28-9. Marcus Hall had a touchdown run to start the game. Craig Krenzel had a touchdown run. Ohio State gets up 21-0 in the game at halftime, ends up winning it 28-9. I mean, they just kind of really had their way with the Washington Huskies. It was. I'd seen games against Washington before. I mean, it just seemed that Ohio State managed to draw them here or there. But I think it was a little bit of a telltale sign of that they still had some dudes on that team.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the theme that we're going to be seeing throughout this show. Is a lot of these ranked versus ranked season openers kind of tell you a little bit about how that season's going to go for Ohio State. That 2003 team. It wasn't a dominating win necessarily. That Washington team ended up not being nearly as good as you thought they were going to be, but that was a primetime game when there were not a whole heck of a lot of primetime games at Ohio State. I remember going to that one nighttime game, big deal, national ABC telecast. Pretty sure that Krenzel and Maurice Hall were on the cover of Sports Illustrated the week after that. It was a very, very, very big win at the time, and an Ohio State team that was, much as that game sort of suggested, pretty darn good, pretty darn talented, but also was not going to be blowing people out all season long. That was kind of there was a little bit of the omen for the season thing. The previous matchup that was back in the 90s, these things happen a lot. Often at the Kickoff Classic in East Rutherford, New Jersey. 3 of the 5 ranked unranked games that Ohio State has played to open the season since 1982 that you found were in that Kickoff Classic game in 1999. It was Miami. I was there for that one. It was about 1 trillion degrees. I was in the very last row of the upper deck with a very hot concrete wall right behind me. And that was a game where Ohio State fans came in expecting another run at a national championship. They'd come in off the Rose Bowl win in 96 and the near run to a national championship, or at least a Rose Bowl in 97, a near run to a national championship in 98. It was like, well, certainly another year like that will follow. And, then they started playing Miami. And then all the expectations for that season were like, oh, Joe Germain is not here anymore.
Yeah, you sit there and you realize, oh, we don't have these guys that are there, and your young guys are young guys, and that's the reason why you don't necessarily see a lot of these ranked matchups. I mean, in today's day, you see a little bit more of these, Chick-fil-A classics in Atlanta or whatever, but in 99... Ohio State certainly was not as deep of a team, and it was kind of the, I don't want to say the beginning of the end, because I think a lot of people were ready for the Cooper era to come to an end, but, I think that at that point people were really kind of realizing that it was time to go. It was time to go, and, that's kind of where things stood.
Yeah, and that was a team that had just lost a ton of talent off of their to the NFL draft. I mean, they lost. That was the Katzenmoyer's gone, and Boston's gone, and Jermaine's gone, and Michael Wiley's gone, and They love that year. It was David Boston, Antoine Winfield, Andy Katzenmoyer, Joe Montgomery, Joe Germain, Damon Moore, Brent Bartholomew, D. Miller, all gone in that 3 first-round picks, a second-round pick. I mean, that was a loaded 1998 team. And then they didn't. That was back in the they used to sell T-shirts at Long's. We don't rebuild, we reload. Like sometimes you rebuild, and something that is the 1999 season. You did in fact rebuild. The year before that was one of the most anticipated season openers ever. Number 1 Ohio State going on the road against Mark Bulger and Amos Zaraway and number 11 West Virginia. That was a game that West Virginia fans were absolutely convinced they were going to show Ohio State who was boss, and nope. That was basically the opposite of the 1999 game. West Virginia scored early, and then I think they scored on their opening drive, and then from then on it was just like, nope, it was all Ohio State all night long. I think West Virginia scored like on the first drive of the game and the last drive of the game, and between that it was 34-3 Ohio State, and not even necessarily as close as the score might indicate. And that was the moment where it was like, oh, all the hype around this team, like, yup, they might live up to all of it.
Yeah, I remember I was working for the ABC affiliate in Columbus. Was that like a CBS game or something like
yes,
that? It was a CBS
yes.
game. It was really weird because we always had the pregame show. And so I was like, I didn't know what to do, but I know that I wasn't in Morgantown for it. But there was a lot of trash talking coming from the West Virginia side that they were going to show these overrated Buckeyes. How real football was going to be played, and Ohio State just kind of had its way with West Virginia, 34-17, not nearly as close as that score indicates. It was the launching point of what everybody figured was going to be a fantastic season.
Yeah, that was one of those games. It was another primetime game, and I remember exactly where I was watching that game, and that was one that you spent all season, all summer thinking about that game and talking about that game, and then on the old AOL college football message boards, just like today, just as everyone will be talking about the Notre Dame game on the old AOL college football message boards. But that was one that was just, there was so much hype around that game, and then it was just sometimes you have those games where, like, now that would be the college game day game where you'd spend all day talking about, oh man, it was West Virginia, and then it was just like very, very immediately like, oh no, this is over, like this is over very, very early. So that was the Washington series and the West Virginia series are both very weird because normally you think of the home team plays 1 year and then plays on the other campus the other year. West Virginia, I think it was like 1987 and 1998 were the two games in that series, and then Washington, it was like 2003 and 2007, and those might have been linked with the 93-94 series with Washington too. So yeah, weird old timey stuff. More weird old timey stuff. The 1995 Kickoff Classic. That was actually the first Ohio State game I ever saw in person. They played number 22 Boston College, won 38-6, and that was they were coming off a 9-4 season the year before, and they had beat Michigan, but it was 9-4, and it was like, okay, is this is the Cooper thing going to work or not? Eddie George it was the only time Eddie George ran for less than 100 yards that season, finished with 99 in that game. John Cooper said afterwards, like, if he had known, he would have kept running them. Sean Springs ran a kickoff back for a touchdown. That was very much the statement game that, okay, the 93 season was kind of this one-off weird 10-1-1 season, and they lost to Michigan, and then they took a big step back in 94. That was kind of like the arrival of like the golden era of John Cooper football, was that game in the Meadowlands.
Yeah, I remember those teams right around that era. I mean, 95, 96, some of the players that were there. And I mean, and it certainly, you look back and, I mean, I know that everybody loves Jeff Hafley and he's at Boston College, but it's kind of weird to think that Boston College, opening the season was a top 25 team. Yes, lo and behold, they were a top team. And I do remember, because I was just out of college right around that time, and a lot of people still weren't sold on John Cooper, and I think that if they would have come up short in that game, I mean, who knows what the timeline would have been. I mean, obviously he was able to ride several more years, win a Rose Bowl and everything else, but there were a lot of people that were already kind of impatient because of Ohio State's inability to win bowl games, to beat Michigan, hell, to beat Illinois. So to come out there and open the season with a win against a top 25 team certainly helped, especially when you look at what scheduling was back then versus what it is today. I mean, very different world.
Yeah, and I mean, you want to make a point about that. The 95 season, out of conference, Ohio State played number 22 Boston College. They also played Washington. That was another one of the Washington seasons. I think they might have played them in 1986 as well, something like that. But they played Washington, they played Boston College, and they also played Notre Dame. Oh, by the way, they played the Notre Dame game in 1995. That was one of, you want to talk about it, one of the most anticipated games in Ohio State history. That is right up there. I'm sure we're going to be talking about that one at some point later on in the fall. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the philosophy of how the scheduling has changed, from over the course of the seasons for Notre Dame. And Ohio State played Pitt that year too, I'm pretty sure. They played Pitt out of conference in 95. I think that was the game that Terry Glenn had 253 or 54 yards receiving.
I know they played them the year too that they played Rice, because they won like 70-7 and 77-0 in their two opening games. And that was the first year of like the Michael Wiley recruiting class.
Yeah, that was 96, 70.
That was 96, but I guess maybe they did get him in 95 as well. Then
they did.
I know they played him in 96. Well, they played him in back-to-back years?
Yeah, they played him 93, 94, 95, and 96. Yep. Okay. And yeah, 95 was 54-14 at Pitt, and that was the Terry Glenn blow-up game, 72-0 in 96. That was the David Boston punt return with 8 guys on the field that he ran back for a touchdown game that really ticked off Mark May. Just ask him about it the next time you see him. But what's interesting though is you go through that schedule: Boston College and Pitt and Notre Dame and Washington. Like, those were 4 significant programs, and Pitt was down at that point, but Notre Dame was just a couple of years off of a national championship caliber season in '93. Boston College was just a couple of years off of beating that Notre Dame team in 1993. Washington was just 4 or 5 years removed from literally a national championship season under Don James. That is a big boy out of conference schedule. You don't really see those anymore. It's interesting to me to see Ohio State now this year being willing to open up with Notre Dame, and I don't know how much of that is TV money speaking versus, some sort of real significant shift in scheduling philosophy. Do you like the opening game, the week 1 opener against a really elite opponent, or to you is it more maybe you're better off sliding that back a week or two and have a warm-up game against a MAC team or something like that before you kind of dive into the deep end of the pool?
I like it when you're returning a quarterback who finished 4th in the Heisman voting, and the other team is going to be trying to figure some things out. So it's a lot easier to have that week 1 type of game when you know who some of your players are going to be at certain positions. I mean, again, there's going to be attrition regardless from year to year. Nobody ever brings back all 22 guys, honestly. So it's better in that situation. I do believe in future schedules there are 2 other years where Ohio State has some, opens at least against Power 5 type teams in terms of what I've seen on future schedules. I like it. I think I'm going to like it more once we see whenever we cross the finish line of moving up from 4 teams to be at 8, 10, 12 in the playoff, where maybe that first game, that first loss isn't a near disqualifier for most teams out there. I think we might see an expansion in terms of how things work out there. But, I think, if we look back, I mean, since 2017, Ohio State's opened against 3 Big Ten opponents. So the only thing that's kept those from being ranked teams have been those teams, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Indiana. But, I think that the schedule makers have had a situation of where, let's open this up a little bit, but we'll see. I mean, we could have all the hindsight in the world come whatever, week after the Notre Dame game.
Yeah, and I mean, the Big Ten did open with a pretty big one last year. They had Penn State going to Wisconsin for week 1 last year, which I know they were not, some of those teams were not necessarily thrilled about that kind of, having to open with that kind of game. But it does seem like it's maybe trending a little bit more that direction. This is a little before both Kevin and my time following Ohio State, but the only time, this is Notre Dame, I think, was number 6 or so in some of the way too early top 25s for this fall. The last time Ohio State played a team ranked that high was 1986 in their season opener. That was yet another kickoff classic. That was against Alabama. It was 16-10. Alabama won that one. Come from behind win. They scored 10 points in the final quarter. Led by quarterback David Shula. Yeah, it's been a minute. That was a David Shula Alabama team that beat Ohio State. Ohio State went to get annihilated by Washington the next week in Seattle, and then bounced back, won the rest of the games, lost to Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, and then won the Cotton Bowl over Texas A&M. So that was the 1986 season for Ohio State. So that probably will not be exactly what happens this year with Ohio State. I don't anticipate them losing 40-7 in week 2 this year, but that week 1 game, there is a reason we're counting down to that one. Sometimes we're counting down to games that are like, well, that's the next game. This is one that I think we start this show every day with the countdown to that game. It is a legitimate, yes, you should be counting down to this game with us too, because it is a pretty big one and only 211 days away. So, Kevin, thank you for joining me. I thought that would be a fun trip down memory lane, looking at some of those season openers, and quite a significant one on the schedule this year as well. Make sure you check out Kevin's Big Me Kickoff podcast. He just dropped a new episode this week. You can find that wherever you find this. Just search Big Me Kickoff or search Buckeye Scoop to find all of our great shows. You can subscribe right there. Leave us a 5-star rating and review as well. And you can also find them on YouTube at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Again, hit that thumbs up button when you're watching those videos, and also hit that bell if you have not already subscribed to our channel. That will get you notified every time we drop a new video. New player interviews, coach interviews, camp highlights, you name it. It's all there. youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.